The flames of the distant barn fire painted the night sky, a menacing orange as Delilah Davis watched her entire life turn to ashes. At 22 years old, she never imagined she'd be standing alone in Wyoming territory in 1876, with nothing but the clothes on her back and her father's weathered journal clutched to her chest. "Miss Davis, you can't stay here," Sheriff Thompson said, his voice thick with exhaustion as he approached her. "There's nothing left." Delilah stood motionless, her honey-brown hair falling loose from its pins, the heat still prickling her skin despite standing a safe distance away. "Where am I supposed to go? This farm is all I have, all I had," the sheriff sighed, removing his hat respectfully. "The widow Jenkins is taking folks in. After you get some rest, you can make arrangements." His eyes softened. "I'm sorry about your pa." 3 months had passed since her father succumbed to pneumonia, leaving her to manage their modest farm alone. Now even that was gone, burned to the ground by what the sheriff suspected was a lightning strike during the evening's fierce storm. The barn, the house, the small garden she'd tended with such care, all consumed by merciless flames. As dawn broke over the charred remains of her homestead, Delilah made a decision. Her father had always spoken of a cousin who'd settled in Whispering Pines, a growing town about 2 days' ride west. With nowhere else to turn, she used what little money she had saved to purchase passage on the next stage coach. The journey was uncomfortable and dusty, the coach packed with travelers of varying dispositions. Across from her sat a mother with 2 small children, beside her an elderly gentleman who snored loudly, and next to him a businessman who kept his face buried in papers. "First time heading to Whispering Pines?" the mother asked, bouncing a fussy toddler on her knee. Delilah nodded. "My father's cousin lives there. I'm hoping he'll help me get established." "It's a decent town," the woman replied. "Better than most in these parts. My husband's working at the sawmill there." When the stagecoach finally rolled into Whispering Pines, Delilah was struck by its size. While not a bustling city by any means, it was substantially larger than the small farming community she'd left behind. Main Street boasted a hotel, general store, saloon, and various other establishments. People moved with purpose, and the sounds of construction echoed from the edge of town. Her heart sank when she discovered her father's cousin had moved on some months ago, heading further west to California in search of opportunities. Standing outside the post office with this unwelcome news, Delilah felt truly alone for the first time in her life. "You look like you could use some help," a kind voice said. Delilah turned to see an older woman with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. "I'm Martha Wilson. I run the boarding house just up the street." "Delilah Davis," she replied, accepting the woman's handshake. "And yes, I could use some help. I've just arrived in town hoping to find my father's cousin, but it seems he's long gone." Martha clicked her tongue sympathetically. "Well, my dear, Whispering Pines has a way of taking in strays. Come along, let's get you settled. We can discuss your situation over a hot meal." The boarding house was clean and modestly furnished, with a handful of permanent residents who worked various jobs around town. Martha offered Delilah a small room at a reduced rate, with the understanding that she would help with chores until she found employment. The mercantile might be hiring, Martha suggested over breakfast the next morning. Mr. Patterson mentioned needing someone with good penmanship to help with inventory. Delilah spent her first week in Whispering Pines, adjusting to her new surroundings and seeking work. The mercantile position had already been filled, but she found temporary employment helping the town seamstress, Mrs. Abernathy, with a large order of clothing for a wealthy rancher's family. "You have skilled hands," Mrs. Abernathy commented, examining Delilah's even stitches. "Have you considered becoming a seamstress yourself?" "I've sewn since I was a girl, but never thought of it as a profession," Delilah admitted. "My mother taught me before she passed." "Well, my dear, in a growing town like this, there's always need for someone who can mend and create. I'm not getting any younger, and my eyes aren't what they used to be." This conversation planted a seed in Delilah's mind. Perhaps she could establish herself here after all. The thought gave her hope as she walked back to the boarding house that evening, her steps lighter than they had been in months. It was on her second Sunday in Whispering Pines that Delilah first heard about Ethan Zimmerman. She was attending services at the small white church when the pastor called for prayers for those affected by the recent fire at the Rocking Z Ranch. "Let us pray for a swift recovery for Ethan Zimmerman," Pastor Miller intoned, "who was gravely injured saving his men from the blaze." After the service, curious about this local rancher, Delilah asked Martha about him. "Ethan's one of the largest cattle ranchers in the territory," Martha explained as they walked home. "Built that spread from nothing after coming west about 8 years ago. He's a fair employer and a generous man when it comes to helping the town." "What happened with the fire?" Delilah asked. Martha's expression turned solemn. "Lightning struck one of his barns during that big storm 2 weeks back. Same storm that hit your area, I imagine. Ethan went in to rescue 2 of his ranch hands who were trapped. Got them out, but not before the roof partially collapsed on him. Dr. Jensen says he was lucky to survive." The mention of a fire caused by lightning sent a chill down Delilah's spine, reminding her of her own recent loss. "How badly was he injured?" "Burns along his right side and face from what I hear. Doc's been riding out there daily to tend to him." Martha shook her head. "Such a shame. He's a handsome man, or was." 2 days later, Mrs. Abernathy approached Delilah with an unexpected request. The housekeeper from the Rocking Z Ranch came by earlier. "She needs someone to help make new shirts for Mr. Zimmerman, special ones that won't irritate his burns as they heal. I recommended you." Delilah hesitated. "I've never made anything so specific before." "It's not so different from regular shirts, just softer fabric and careful seam placement. The ranch will provide the material." Mrs. Abernathy patted her hand. "They're paying well, and it could lead to more work for you." The prospect of establishing herself as a skilled seamstress in town was too good to pass up. Delilah agreed to ride out to the ranch the following day to take measurements and discuss the specifics. The Rocking Z Ranch sprawled across the landscape about 5 miles outside town. As Delilah approached in the wagon Mrs. Abernathy had arranged for her, she could see that it was a substantial operation. A large 2-story house stood as the centerpiece, with various outbuildings, corrals, and barns arranged around it. In the distance, cattle grazed on rolling hills. One barn still showed significant fire damage, its charred frame a stark contrast to the well-maintained buildings around it. Workers moved about, already rebuilding what had been lost. The housekeeper, Mrs. Fleming, greeted Delilah at the door. She was a stout woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, but kind eyes. "Thank you for coming, Miss Davis. Mr. Zimmerman is in considerable discomfort, and his existing shirts are causing him pain." "I'll do my best to help," Delilah promised, following the housekeeper inside. The house was impressively furnished, with quality pieces that spoke of success but not ostentation. "Mr. Zimmerman is normally a private man," Mrs. Fleming explained as they climbed the stairs, "but he understands the necessity of your visit. Please don't be alarmed by his appearance. His injuries are still quite fresh." Delilah steeled herself before entering the bedroom. The curtains were partially drawn, casting the room in subdued light. A man sat in a chair by the window, his posture rigid with discomfort. His right profile was turned away from the door. "Mr. Zimmerman, Miss Davis is here from town to measure you for the new shirts," Mrs. Fleming announced. The man turned slowly, and Delilah had to consciously control her expression. The right side of his face was severely burned, the skin red and raw in places, already forming thick scars in others. His right eye was undamaged but surrounded by injured tissue. The burns extended down his neck and disappeared beneath his loose shirt, which he wore draped over his shoulders rather than properly buttoned. "Miss Davis," he acknowledged, his voice deeper than she expected. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Zimmerman," she replied with a slight curtsy. "I'm sorry for your injury." A bitter smile twisted the undamaged left side of his face. "As am I," he gestured to a chair. "Please sit. Mrs. Fleming tells me you're new to Whispering Pines." Delilah sat, arranging her measuring tape and notebook on her lap. "Yes, just arrived 2 weeks ago. I'm staying at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house while I establish myself." "Martha's a good woman," he said, shifting slightly and wincing. "How do you find our town?" "Everyone has been kind," Delilah replied. "It's been a comfort after losing my farm." This caught his attention. "You lost your farm?" "To a fire. Lightning strike during the same storm that hit your ranch, I believe." Something flickered in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, of a shared experience. "I'm sorry to hear that. Was anyone injured?" "No, I was alone by then. My father passed 3 months ago, and I had no other family there." She didn't mention that she'd had no other family anywhere, now that her father's cousin had moved on. He nodded, seemingly lost in thought. After a moment, he straightened. "Well, I suppose we should get on with the measuring." Delilah approached him carefully. "I'll need to see the extent of the burns to know where to place the seams." Ethan hesitated before allowing his shirt to slip further from his shoulders. The burns covered his right shoulder and upper arm, extending down to his elbow and across part of his chest. The skin was in various states of healing, some areas still raw and others forming the thick, rope-like scars that would remain. Working with clinical precision, Delilah measured him, noting where regular seams would rub against damaged skin. She asked questions about which movements caused him the most discomfort and what fabrics had proven most irritating. "You're very thorough," he remarked as she recorded the final measurements. "These shirts need to help, not hurt," she replied simply. "I'll create a design that opens along the side rather than the front, with flat seams placed away from your burns." For just a moment, genuine gratitude crossed his features before the mask of cool reserve returned. "How soon can they be ready?" "I can have 2 completed within a week and more to follow." She hesitated, then added, "If the design works well, I could teach Mrs. Fleming how to adjust your existing shirts similarly." "That would be appreciated." He carefully pulled his current shirt back into place. "Mrs. Fleming will see you out and arrange payment." As Delilah packed her supplies, she noticed a photograph on the dresser, a younger Ethan Zimmerman standing proudly before what must have been a newly built ranch house. His face handsome and unmarred, eyes filled with confidence and ambition. Following her visit, Delilah threw herself into creating the special shirts. She selected the softest cotton available and developed an innovative design that would minimize discomfort. The work absorbed her completely, offering a welcome distraction from her own troubles. A week later, she returned to the Rocking Z with the first 2 completed shirts. Mrs. Fleming showed her up to Ethan's room, where he was standing by the window, looking out at the ongoing reconstruction of the burned barn. "Miss Davis has brought your shirts, Mr. Zimmerman," Mrs. Fleming announced. He turned, seeming stronger than during their previous meeting. "Thank you, Mrs. Fleming. Would you give us a moment?" After the housekeeper departed, Delilah presented her work. "I've tried something a bit different with these." They open completely along the right side with small, flat buttons that shouldn't press into your skin. Ethan examined the garments with careful attention. "The workmanship is excellent," he said, running his fingers along the seams. "May I try one?" "Of course." He stepped behind a dressing screen in the corner of the room. A few minutes later, he emerged wearing one of the new shirts. The difference in his bearing was immediately noticeable. He moved with greater ease, no longer holding himself so rigidly to avoid fabric rubbing against his injuries. "This is remarkable," he said, rotating his arm experimentally. "I can barely feel it against the burns." Delilah couldn't help smiling at his obvious relief. "I'm glad it helps. I've brought patterns so Mrs. Fleming can adapt your other shirts similarly." "I'd prefer you make them if you're willing," he said. "Your craftsmanship is superior. I'll pay whatever is fair." The offer was too good to refuse. Regular work for someone of Ethan Zimmerman's standing would help establish her reputation in Whispering Pines. "I would be happy to make more." As she prepared to leave, Ethan cleared his throat. "Miss Davis, would you mind returning next week? Not just to deliver shirts, but perhaps to read to me for an hour or so. The doctor recommends I rest my eyes, but I find myself going mad with boredom." The request surprised her. "I would be glad to, Mr. Zimmerman." And so began a new routine. Each week, Delilah would ride out to the Rocking Z, delivering new shirts and spending an hour reading to Ethan from books he selected: histories, adventure tales, and occasionally poetry. These reading sessions gradually extended as Ethan's health improved, and he found himself enjoying her company. During her fourth visit, as she read from a volume of Wordsworth's poems, Ethan interrupted her. "You miss your farm, Miss Davis." Delilah closed the book, marking her place with her finger. "Yes, though not as much as I did initially. I miss the connection to my parents more than the place itself, I think." "I understand that sentiment." He shifted in his chair, turning so his burned side was less visible to her, something she'd noticed he often did unconsciously. "When I came west, I left behind everything familiar, including my family's graves." "What brought you here?" she asked, realizing how little she knew about him despite their weekly meetings. "A desire to build something of my own." His gaze drifted to the window. "My father was a successful businessman in Boston, but I had 3 older brothers ahead of me in the family enterprise. I wanted land, open space, a chance to succeed or fail by my own efforts." "And you've succeeded admirably," Delilah observed. A rueful expression crossed his face. "Yes, until recently." He gestured vaguely toward his scarred face. "The ranch still stands," she pointed out. "One barn can be rebuilt. It's not the barn I'm concerned about." His voice had taken on an edge she hadn't heard before. "A man's face is his fortune in many ways, Miss Davis. People trust a strong, whole face. They don't trust this." He turned fully toward her, displaying his scarred visage without the usual attempt to shield her from it. Delilah met his gaze steadily. "People trust actions and character, Mr. Zimmerman. Your men speak of how you ran into a burning building to save them. That builds more trust than any unmarred face could." He studied her for a long moment. "You're either remarkably kind or remarkably naive, Miss Davis." "Neither, I hope," she replied with a small smile. "Just practical." As spring progressed into early summer, Delilah found herself looking forward to these weekly visits more than she cared to admit. Ethan was well-read, intelligent, and possessed a dry wit that emerged more frequently as he became comfortable with her. For her part, Delilah found it easier to speak candidly with him than with anyone else in her new life. During one visit in June, she arrived to find Ethan outside for the first time since she'd known him. He was seated under a large oak tree, his hat pulled low to shade his face from casual observation. He rose as her wagon approached. "Miss Davis," he greeted her, taking the reins of her horse. "I hope you don't mind meeting outdoors today. The walls were beginning to close in on me." "Not at all," she replied as he helped her down from the wagon. "It's a beautiful day." A blanket had been spread beneath the tree with a small picnic arranged. "Mrs. Fleming's idea," he explained, seeming almost embarrassed. "She thought you might enjoy lunch after your journey." They settled on the blanket, and Delilah noticed that Ethan positioned himself so his scarred side was away from her, a habit he had largely abandoned indoors. "How are the shirts working?" she asked, accepting a plate of cold chicken and bread from him. "Exceptionally well, Doctor. Jensen says my burns are healing faster than expected, partly due to not being constantly irritated by ill-fitting clothing." He poured her a glass of lemonade. "I've recommended your services to several people in town." "Thank you," she said sincerely. "I've had 3 new customers mention your name this past week alone." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Ethan spoke again. "I've been thinking about your situation, Miss Davis." "Oh," she said, curious about his serious tone. "You mentioned wanting to establish yourself as a seamstress in town. There's a small building on the edge of my property, near the road to town. It was originally built as a way station but hasn't been used in years. With some renovation, it could serve as both a shop and living quarters." Delilah stared at him, surprised by the offer. "That's very generous, Mr. Zimmerman." "It's not charity," he said quickly. "I would charge a fair rent, but the location would be advantageous, accessible to both town residents and the outlying ranches." The proposal was tempting. The building he described would give her independence and the opportunity to build her business. "May I see it before deciding?" "Of course." He stood and offered his hand to help her up. "It's just a short walk from here." The building was indeed small but solidly constructed of stone and timber. It consisted of 2 rooms downstairs and a loft above, with a stone fireplace and several windows that would provide good light for sewing. "It needs cleaning and some repairs," Ethan acknowledged as they examined the interior, "but it's sound. I would have those taken care of before you moved in, of course." Delilah walked the space, envisioning where she could set up her work area and how she might arrange the living quarters. "It's perfect," she admitted. "But why offer it to me? Surely you could find other uses for it." Ethan was silent for a moment, standing by the window with his scarred side in profile. "Perhaps I enjoy your company, Miss Davis, and selfishly wish to have you nearby rather than eventually losing you to some opportunity in another town." The honest admission caught her off guard. "I've come to value our conversations as well," she said carefully, "and the offer is very attractive from a practical standpoint. Then you'll consider it." There was a hint of eagerness in his voice that he couldn't quite mask. "Yes," she replied, "I'll consider it." The following week, Delilah gave Ethan her answer. She would accept his offer of the building, with an agreement for fair rent, and the understanding that she would be free to operate her business as she saw fit. He arranged for his ranch hands to make the necessary repairs and improvements, and by early July, Delilah was ready to move in. Martha Wilson expressed mixed feelings about losing her boarder, but was genuinely happy for Delilah's opportunity. "Just be careful, my dear," she advised as Delilah packed her few belongings. "Living alone on the edge of a bachelor's property might cause talk." "My reputation is above reproach," Delilah assured her, "and Mr. Zimmerman has been nothing but a gentleman." "I'm sure he has," Martha replied. "But a young, unmarried woman should always be mindful of appearances." Despite these warnings, Delilah moved into her new home with a sense of optimism she hadn't felt since before her father's death. The space was transformed, clean, repaired, and even furnished with basic necessities. A sign hung outside reading Davis Dressmaking and Alterations, painted by one of Ethan's ranch hands who had a talent for lettering. Business began slowly but steadily increased as word spread about her skill. The location proved ideal, as Ethan had predicted, attracting customers from both Whispering Pines and the surrounding ranches. Within a month, she had enough work to keep her busy 6 days a week. Her friendship with Ethan continued to deepen. He would often stop by on his way to or from town, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book he thought she might enjoy, fresh fruit from the orchard on his property, or wildflowers his men had gathered. Their conversations ranged from literature to philosophy to practical matters of running their respective businesses. By August, Ethan had recovered enough to resume many of his regular duties around the ranch, though he still wore the special shirts Delilah made for him. His burns had healed as much as they ever would, leaving significant scarring on his face and body, but the pain had largely subsided. One evening, as summer was beginning to wane, Delilah was sitting on the small porch of her shop, enjoying the cool breeze after a long day of work. She saw Ethan approaching on horseback, returning from town later than usual. "Good evening, Miss Davis," he called as he dismounted. "Still working at this hour?" "Taking a well-deserved rest," she corrected with a smile. "Would you care to join me? I have lemonade." He tied his horse to the hitching post and came up to the porch, removing his hat as he sat in the chair beside hers. His movements were easier now, less guarded, though he still instinctively angled his scarred side away from direct view. "I have news," he said after accepting a glass of lemonade. "The railroad is definitely coming through Whispering Pines next year. The contracts were signed today." "That's wonderful for the town," Delilah remarked, "and for your ranch as well, I imagine. Indeed, it will make shipping cattle much more efficient." He took a sip of his drink. "It also means the town will grow rapidly. Your business should prosper even more." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Delilah was acutely aware of Ethan's presence beside her, of the subtle scent of leather and prairie grass that always seemed to accompany him. "May I ask you something personal, Miss Davis?" Ethan said suddenly. "Of course. Why have you never married? You're intelligent, skilled, and—" He hesitated, then added, "quite beautiful. Surely you've had opportunities." The question surprised her, though she'd wondered the same about him. "There was someone back east. We were to be married, but he changed his mind when my mother died and I had to care for my father." "He didn't want the burden of an ailing father-in-law," she shrugged lightly. "After that, there wasn't time for courting between nursing my father and running the farm." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "His loss, clearly. And you?" she asked, feeling bold. "You were established here for years before the accident. Why no Mrs. Zimmerman?" A rueful smile tugged at his mouth. "Similar story, different details. I was engaged briefly when I first arrived in the territory. She decided the frontier life was too difficult and returned east to marry a banker." He swirled the lemonade in his glass. "After that, I was too focused on building the ranch to give much thought to marriage. And now—" the question slipped out before she could reconsider it. Ethan's expression grew solemn. "Now, well, my prospects have changed considerably." He gestured to his scarred face. "This isn't what most women dream of coming home to." Delilah felt a surge of indignation on his behalf. Any woman worth having would see beyond that. Would they? His tone was skeptical. "People avert their eyes when I ride into town. Children stare until their parents pull them away. Even here now, you're looking at my left side, not meeting my eyes directly." Startled by the observation, Delilah deliberately turned to face him fully. I wasn't aware I was doing that. I apologize. Don't, he said quickly. It's a natural reaction. I don't blame you or anyone else for it. He set down his glass and stood. I should be going. Thank you for the lemonade and conversation. As he moved to leave, Delilah rose and impulsively caught his arm. Ethan. It was the first time she had used his given name. I truly don't see you that way. He looked down at her hand on his arm, then up to her face. Something vulnerable flickered in his eyes before he masked it. You're kind to say so, Delilah. The sound of her name on his lips sent an unexpected warmth through her. It's not kindness. It's truth. For a long moment, they stood close together in the fading light, something unspoken passing between them. Then Ethan gently removed his arm from her grasp. Good night, he said softly and walked to his horse. Delilah watched him ride away, her thoughts in turmoil. When had her feelings for Ethan Zimmerman shifted from friendship to something deeper? And more importantly, what was she going to do about it? The next day, a letter arrived from Mrs. Abernathy in town, asking Delilah to help with preparations for the upcoming Harvest Festival. The annual event was the social highlight of Whispering Pines, bringing together townspeople and those from outlying areas for a day of celebration before winter set in. Delilah threw herself into the work, creating decorations and helping plan activities alongside the town's other businesswomen. The distraction was welcome, giving her time to sort through her confused feelings about Ethan. They continued to see each other regularly, but a new undercurrent of tension ran beneath their interactions. Sometimes she would catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. Other times, he seemed deliberately distant, as if pulling back from their growing closeness. 2 weeks before the Harvest Festival, a late summer thunderstorm rolled across the prairie. Delilah was working late, rushing to finish a dress for Mrs. Patterson to wear to the festival, when the first rumble of thunder shook her little house. Rain soon followed, pounding against the roof and windows with surprising ferocity. As the storm intensified, Delilah found herself growing anxious. The sound of rain and thunder brought back vivid memories of the night she lost her farm. She tried to focus on her sewing, but her hands trembled with each crack of lightning. A particularly loud thunderclap directly overhead made her jump, pricking her finger with the needle. At that moment, someone pounded on her door. Heart racing, she approached cautiously. "Who is it?" she called over the roar of the storm. "Ethan, are you all right?" Relief flooded through her as she opened the door. Ethan stood there, drenched from the short ride from his house, concern evident on his face. "I'm fine," she assured him, stepping back to let him enter. "Just a bit unsettled by the storm." "I thought you might be," he said, removing his dripping hat. "Given your experience with the fire." The thoughtfulness of his gesture riding through a dangerous storm to check on her touched her deeply. "Thank you for coming. It was kind of you to think of me." Ethan ran a hand through his wet hair, looking somewhat embarrassed. "I remembered how you described that night. Thought you might appreciate company until it passes." "I would," she admitted. "Very much." She took his wet coat and hung it near the fireplace to dry, then offered him a towel for his hair. As the storm continued to rage outside, they sat before the fire, talking quietly. Ethan told stories of his early days on the ranch, and Delilah shared memories of her childhood in Kentucky before her family moved west. "My mother would have liked you," she said, as the thunder began to recede into the distance. "She always said the measure of a person was how they behaved when no one important was watching." "And how do I measure up?" he asked, his voice lighter than usual. "Quite well," she replied with a smile. "Riding through a thunderstorm to check on a seamstress isn't something many ranch owners would do." "You're hardly just a seamstress to me, Delilah." The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with meaning. Before she could respond, he stood. "The storm's passing. I should return to the ranch before my men organize a search party." At the door, he paused. "Will you attend the harvest festival?" "Yes, I've been helping with the preparations." "Would you consider? That is, might I escort you?" His normally confident demeanor had given way to something almost boyish in his uncertainty. Delilah felt a flutter of excitement. "I would like that very much." His smile, a full, genuine smile that reached his eyes, transformed his face. "Until then," he said, and stepped back into the light rain. The harvest festival arrived on a perfect autumn day. The town square was decorated with bunting and harvest displays, tables were laden with food, and a platform had been erected for dancing. People from miles around gathered, dressed in their finest clothes and eager for a day of celebration. Ethan arrived at Delilah's shop promptly at 10, driving a smart buggy rather than riding horseback. He was dressed in a new suit, his hair neatly combed, hat in hand. Despite his obvious effort to look his best, Delilah noticed he seemed unusually tense. "You look beautiful," he said as she emerged in the new dress she had made for the occasion, a deep green that complemented her honey-brown hair and hazel eyes. "Thank you," she replied, accepting his hand as he helped her into the buggy. "You look very handsome yourself." He gave a short, disbelieving laugh, but said nothing as he took his place beside her and flicked the reins. The festival was already in full swing when they arrived. Heads turned as they made their way through the crowd, partly due to Ethan's status as one of the most prominent men in the area, partly due to curiosity about his scarred appearance, and partly due to speculation about his relationship with Delilah. "People are staring," she murmured as they approached the food tables. "They always do," he replied grimly. "Not just at you," she clarified, "at us, together." This seemed to give him pause. "Does it bother you?" "Not at all," she said firmly. "Does it bother you?" For the first time since they'd arrived, he smiled. "No." The day progressed pleasantly as they enjoyed the various activities. They watched the children's races, applauded the winners of the agricultural competitions, and sampled the offerings at the food tables. Throughout it all, Ethan remained at her side, gradually relaxing as the day wore on. In the late afternoon, the band began playing and couples moved to the dance platform. Ethan watched them for a while, then turned to Delilah. "Would you care to dance?" She hesitated, unsure if he was asking out of obligation or genuine desire. "We don't have to if you'd rather not." "I would like to dance with you," he said simply, offering his hand. They joined the other couples on the platform. Ethan proved to be a capable dancer, guiding her confidently through a waltz. As they moved together, Delilah was acutely aware of the whispers and glances directed their way, but they mattered less with each passing moment. As evening approached, lanterns were lit around the square, creating a warm, golden glow. The band switched to slower tunes, and Ethan drew Delilah closer as they continued to dance. "Thank you for today," he said softly. "It's been a long time since I've enjoyed myself so much in public." "I've enjoyed it too," she replied. "Very much." As the music ended, they remained standing close together, reluctant to break the spell of the moment. Finally, Ethan stepped back slightly. "Would you like to walk for a bit? It's getting crowded here." They strolled to the edge of the square, where a small park offered some privacy. The sounds of the festival faded slightly as they walked along a tree-lined path, the autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet. "Delilah," Ethan said, coming to a stop beneath a large oak tree. "I need to tell you something." Her heart quickened at his serious tone. "Yes, these past months since you came to Whispering Pines have been transformative for me, not just because of the shirts or the reading or the conversations, but because of you, who you are." He took a deep breath. I find myself thinking about you constantly, wanting to be near you, but I'm afraid. Afraid of what? She prompted gently when he faltered. He gestured to his scarred face. Of this. Of asking you to accept something that repulses most people. Ethan, she said firmly, taking his hands in hers. Look at me. He raised his eyes to meet hers, vulnerability plain in his expression. Your scars don't repulse me. They never have. They are ugly, he said bluntly. We both know that. Delilah reached up to touch the scarred side of his face gently. They're proof you stayed. Proof you ran into a burning building to save others instead of saving yourself. How could I find that anything but admirable? For a moment he seemed unable to speak, his eyes searching hers for any sign of insincerity. Finding none, he covered her hand with his own, pressing it more firmly against his cheek. Delilah Davis, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I am falling in love with you. I have been for months now. If there's any chance you might someday feel the same, I already do, she interrupted, her own voice trembling slightly. I love you, Ethan. The admission hung in the air between them for a heartbeat before he pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that belied his strength. Delilah responded in kind, her arms encircling his neck as she returned the kiss with equal fervor. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. I never thought to find this again, he murmured. Happiness, hope, nor did I, she admitted. After losing everything, I couldn't imagine building a new life that would feel like more than just surviving. And now, she smiled up at him. Now I can imagine a future full of possibility, with you if you want that. I want nothing more, he assured her, capturing her lips in another kiss that promised a lifetime of devotion. They returned to the festival hand in hand, no longer concerned with the curious glances and whispers. As the evening concluded with a display of fireworks, Ethan and Delilah stood together, his arm around her waist, her head resting against his shoulder. Will you have dinner with me tomorrow? He asked as they watched the colorful explosions light up the night sky. At the ranch. I'd like you to see it properly, not just as a visitor but as. As what? She prompted when he hesitated. As someone who might consider making it her home someday, he said quietly. The implication was clear and Delilah felt a surge of joy. I would love that. The following weeks saw a rapid evolution in their relationship. Ethan became a daily visitor at Delilah's shop, often bringing lunch or simply stopping by to see her between his duties at the ranch. She, in turn, began spending more time at the Rocking Z, getting to know the staff and learning about the operations that consumed so much of Ethan's time and energy. Mrs. Fleming, initially reserved, warmed to Delilah as she observed the positive effect she had on her employer. He smiles now, she told Delilah one afternoon as they prepared dinner together. Before you, after the accident, I wasn't sure he ever would again. He has a wonderful smile, Delilah agreed, thinking of how it transformed his entire face, scars and all. He's a good man, Mrs. Fleming continued, her tone becoming more serious. The best I've known. He deserves happiness. I think we all do, Delilah replied simply. As autumn deepened toward winter, Ethan approached Delilah with a proposal not of marriage, not yet, but of business. The railroad will bring new opportunities, he explained as they sat before the fire in his study one evening. I've been thinking of diversifying. The land to the east of the main ranch would be perfect for raising horses. You want to start a horse breeding operation? She asked, intrigued by his enthusiasm. Yes, but I need a partner who understands quality and has an eye for detail. He took her hand. Someone like you. Delilah was surprised. I know little about horses beyond riding them, but you understand breeding for desirable traits. It's not so different from selecting fabrics and designs that work together harmoniously. He squeezed her hand. Plus, I trust your judgment implicitly. The confidence he placed in her was deeply moving. I would need to learn a great deal. We could learn together, he suggested. Build something new, side by side. The prospect was exciting, not just the business opportunity, but what it represented for their relationship. I'd like that, she said. Very much. With that decision made, they began planning in earnest. Ethan arranged for the purchase of several quality mares and 2 stallions with impressive bloodlines. Delilah, true to her nature, researched everything she could about horse breeding, consulting books and experienced breeders in the region. As they worked together, their bond deepened beyond romance to true partnership. Ethan valued Delilah's insights and perspective, while she admired his vision and determination. Together, they complemented each other in ways neither had anticipated. The first significant snowfall came in early December, blanketing the prairie in white. Ethan arrived at Delilah's shop just as dusk was falling, stomping the snow from his boots before entering. "It's getting worse out there," he reported, removing his hat and coat. "The roads will be impassable by morning if it keeps up." Delilah looked up from her sewing, concerned. "Should you head back to the ranch while you still can?" "Actually," he said, producing a small package from his pocket, "I was hoping you might allow me to impose on your hospitality tonight. I have something important to discuss, and I'd rather not risk the journey in the dark." She felt a flutter of anticipation at his formal tone. "Of course. I'll prepare something for dinner." As they ate the simple meal she prepared, Ethan seemed uncharacteristically nervous, repeatedly checking the package he had placed on the table beside him. "Is everything all right?" she finally asked. "You seem distracted." He met her gaze, a mixture of emotions playing across his face. "I had planned a more elaborate setting for this, but perhaps simplicity is better." He pushed his plate aside and reached for the package. "Delilah, these past months have been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," she said softly. "When I was injured, I thought certain doors had closed forever, not just marriage, but connection, true partnership." He unwrapped the package, revealing a small velvet box. "You showed me how wrong I was." Delilah's breath caught as he opened the box to display a diamond ring, elegant in its simplicity. "Ethan, I love you, Delilah Davis, your compassion, your strength, your vision for what could be rather than what is." He left his chair to kneel beside hers. "Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled in her eyes as she looked from the ring to the man before her, this complex, honorable man who had become everything to her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Ethan Zimmerman." His hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her with a passion that spoke of all they had overcome and all they had yet to experience together. They were married on Christmas Eve in the small church in Whispering Pines. The building was decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, candles illuminating the simple sanctuary. Despite the winter weather, the church was full. Townspeople, ranch hands, and neighboring ranchers all gathered to witness the union. Delilah wore a dress of ivory satin that she had created herself, with Mrs. Abernathy's assistance for the more intricate details. Ethan, resplendent in a new suit, waited for her at the altar, his face alight with joy as she walked toward him on the arm of Sheriff Thompson, who had agreed to give her away. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When Pastor Miller pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed his bride without hesitation or self-consciousness, no longer concerned with hiding his scars or what others might think of them. The reception was held at the Rocking Z Ranch, the house transformed with decorations and filled with music and laughter. As the evening progressed, Delilah found a moment alone with her new husband in the quiet of his now their study. "Happy, Mrs. Zimmerman?" he asked, drawing her into his arms. "Completely, Mr. Zimmerman," she replied, reaching up to trace the line where his scars met undamaged skin. "And you, more than I ever thought possible." He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "You gave me back my future, Delilah." "We built it together," she corrected gently. "And we'll continue to do so, every day." As the snow fell softly outside, they sealed this promise with a kiss. Two souls who had lost everything only to find something greater in each other. The years that followed saw the fulfillment of their shared dreams. The Rocking Z prospered, expanding its cattle operations and establishing a reputation for breeding exceptional horses. The railroad's arrival brought new markets and opportunities, just as Ethan had predicted. Delilah maintained her dressmaking business, though on a more selective basis, focusing on creating special garments for those with needs similar to what Ethan had experienced during his recovery. Her designs for people with physical challenges became sought after throughout the territory. Their personal happiness was complete when, in the spring of 1879, their first child was born, a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Ethan's mother. She was followed 2 years later by a son, Daniel, named for Delilah's father. The children grew up surrounded by love, learning the value of hard work, compassion, and seeing beyond superficial appearances. As Whispering Pines developed from a frontier town into a thriving community, the Zimmermans became its most respected citizens, known for their generosity and progressive vision. They established a fund to help those who had lost homes or livelihoods to fire, ensuring that no one in their community would face the devastation they had both experienced without support. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Delilah with a special gift, a framed drawing he had commissioned of her small shop where they had first truly connected, along with a journal bound in soft leather. "What's this?" she asked, running her fingers over the blank pages of the journal. "I thought you might want to write our story," he explained, "for Elizabeth and Daniel and their children someday, how two people who lost everything found everything in each other." Delilah smiled, thinking of all they had overcome and built together. "It's a good story," she agreed. "One worth preserving." That night, after the children were asleep, Ethan found Delilah in their bedroom, already writing in the journal. "What have you started with?" he asked, sitting beside her on their bed. She showed him the first line. The flames of the distant barn fire painted the night sky a menacing orange as Delilah Davis watched her entire life turn to ashes. "A bit dramatic, don't you think?" he teased gently. "Perhaps," she acknowledged with a smile. "But accurate. And necessary to understand what came after." Ethan nodded, his expression growing thoughtful. "We're defined not by what we lose, but by what we do in the aftermath. And by who stands beside us through it all," Delilah added, reaching up to trace the scars on his face, scars that had long since ceased to be remarkable to her. Simply another part of the man she loved. "Always," he promised, leaning in to kiss her with the same tenderness he had shown on that first night beneath the oak tree at the harvest festival. Outside their window, the stars shone over the vast Wyoming landscape, bearing witness to a love that had transformed loss into legacy, pain into purpose, and two separate journeys into one shared destination.